So, good afternoon, everybody. People are trickling in. And we're going to get started right away as soon as I introduce or present our two speakers who look a bit funny in the presentation. They don't look funny, but the presentation. Eva and Joan, Eva is our president, Joan, our board member, are going to be presenting this afternoon. After their presentation, Stephen is going to be moderating the questions. We're still working out our new configuration of boardroom and what the camera can take. And obviously this is not the best solution, so bear with us. But I promise you that those two people at the end of that table are Eva and Joan. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Quebec Community Groups Network and its member organizations carry out their activities on partially unceded lands and territories, which were the traditional homes and gathering places for many Indigenous nations, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. The QCGN acknowledges our First Nations have a long and rich history of occupation and stewardship of these lands that long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. The QCGN's recognition and respect for the history of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people is an important step towards building trust and creating and renewing relationships with contemporary Indigenous peoples and communities. So, welcome everyone. We're here to talk about C-13. I hope, maybe you haven't, but I hope we can offer it to you after, that you have read an op-ed that appeared in the Hill Times, I guess 10 days ago now, that garnered a lot of attention. This legislation is aimed at modernizing the Official Languages Act. It's going to create a new law, the use of French and English in federally regulated private businesses. The QCGN, writ large with many of our members and stakeholders, is concerned about the new direction of the Government of Canada and the long-term effects this change will have on the application of the Act and language rights of English-speaking Quebecers. This is very timely as well as we go into the election, and we'll have the results of the election in Quebec next week. For the QCGN, the pedal is to the metal on convincing the Government of Canada to re-examine Bill C-13 and how the bill can be changed, if the bill can be stopped, what are our options as an English-speaking community in making our voices heard. So this is an opportunity today to for us to bring you even more awareness to what the official languages is and how this Bill C-13 is problematic. Joan, Eva, thank you for helping us with this very important conversation. Are you on mute, folks? Now you guys are on mute. Whoops, we still need for you. Can we unmute them if they're?
How's that?
There we go. Thank you.
And Abel, could you start the PowerPoint, please?
I want to just reiterate Sylvia's welcome. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I know that we have been Sylvia mentioned the provincial election that's coming up on October 3rd. And I know that we have all been very preoccupied with Bill 96. But while all that is going on, there is Bill C-13, which is an equal concern for us as an English-speaking community. And I think that it's an important that we all understand the implications for the English-speaking community, So Joan has very graciously, Joan Fraser, our senator, has very graciously accepted to join me in presenting an overview of C-13 and the concerns that we have. And I'll start it off with just going over very quickly what the Official Languages Act is as it stands now, and then we'll go into the changes that are being proposed. So the Official Languages Act was created to ensure respect for English and French as the official languages of Canada way back in 1969 and revised in 1988. And that version, the 1988 version, is what is still in force today. And Parliament has been, for the past few years, talking about modernizing it. And we, both the Francophone minority language community outside Quebec and ourselves as well, have been looking forward to this modernization and have played a very important role in preparing briefs and so on and so forth, which Stephen put up, I believe, that you can access it. Very important. So the purpose of the Act, and I will cite it here now, is to ensure respect for English and French as the official languages of Canada, and to ensure the equality, and that's an important word, ensure the equality of status and equal rights and privileges as to their use in all federal institutions. It was also meant to support the development of English and French linguistic minority communities and generally advance the equality of status and the use of English and French languages within Canadian society. And finally, it set out the powers, duties, and functions of federal institutions with respect to the official languages of Canada. Now, the importance of the Official Languages Act, or the OLA, as we tend to call it, cannot be overstated. The original act, passed in 1969, was passed in response to the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism. Some of you may know about that more than others, and some of them may have been, such as myself, may have been around. And it was mandated to develop the country on principles of equality between English and French. And I keep underlining the word equality because that is a very important issue, as you will see as we move forward. The B&B Commission was established in response to severe strains placed on Canadian unity over the issue of language way back in the 1960s. The Act continues to be a critical tool of national unity built around the principle of linguistic duality, a multinational country centered around two official languages, French and English. Now, you may ask, why is the Official Languages Act important to English-speaking Quebecers in particular? Well, it gives life to constitutional language rights with respect to services provided by the Government of Canada. Now, the services provided by the federal government in Quebec are limited, but they are important. They include such things as immigration, parts of immigration now, passports, employment insurance. So they touch the everyday life of all of us in Quebec. In addition to services, there's also the question of it gave employment language rights to employees of the federal public service who provide these services, as well as the participation of both English and French-speaking minority language communities in the federal public service. Another important component of the Official Languages Act is what we familiarly call Part 7, which is the advancement of English and French, which is particularly important to English-speaking Quebecers, since it's the legal foundation through which the Government of Canada and its institutions takes what is called positive measures to enhance the vitality of English and French linguistic minority communities. These positive measures are mostly contained in the various strategies of the different departments and through policies and programs, which and packaged now since a few years, since 2018, in the action plans. The action plan for official languages, the most recent one, dates, well, it's been going on from 2018 to 2023. It's a 5-year plan and invest in our future through a multi-billion-dollar strategy through which federal investments are channeled to both French and English-speaking communities directly to community organizations or through intergovernmental agreements such as education with the government of Quebec. These federal resources target important sectors, as I mentioned, education, but health and social services, access to justice, employment, and economic development, research, many of these which are under provincial jurisdiction. And these services are the lifeblood of many community organizations.
You have the next slide, please.
So the question arises of whether and how to modernize the Official Languages Act. Why should we do it? Well, almost any act that has been in force for 30-odd years can do with a bit of revision. And as Eva noted, the last major overhaul of the Official Languages Act was in 1988. Quite a few things have changed since then, notably on the demographic front. There has been a decline since the 1980s in the rate of bilingualism, particularly among English-speaking Canadians. And there has been a decline in the proportion of francophones within Canadian society. And these things raise challenges. In particular, as Eva mentioned, there is the matter of Part 7, which is so important for linguistic minority communities, but which has real challenges. One of the problems is the lack of clarity. It really is written in vague aspirational language, saying people should make efforts to do this, that, and the other. The government should. It lacks any enforcement mechanism to ensure that those positive measures are in fact taken and accounted for. There is a complete lack of accountability in that section of the Act, which means that although when it was passed, Part 7, there were great hopes that it would really reinforce and enrich the official languages regime in Canada. It has not lived up to the great hopes that were vested in it at that time. So the process of thinking about modernization began in 2009, and it focused first on Part 4 of the Act, which concerns communications with and services to the public. But that was basically dealt with through regulatory reform. I mean, there's always room for some improvement, but basically those concerns were addressed. But there remained other concerns with the Act, in particular Part 7. So in 2017, there was a very serious and long study begun by the Senate Standing, flag for the Senate, if I may here, by the Senate Standing Committee on Official Languages. That study really broke important ground. It did significant research and brought together official language minority communities to consider what today's needs are for those communities. The QCGN led English-speaking Quebec's participation in that process. We were the main voice in conveying what we thought should be done to modernize the Act. And it's important to note that in so doing, the QCGN worked very closely with Francophone minority organizations outside of Quebec. those communities do not necessarily have the same situation as Quebec, but many of the needs are similar, and there was an understanding that it was important for all language minority communities to be reflected in the modernization of the Act. So after long discussion, a genuine consensus was reached between Anglophone and Francophone minority organizations in 2018. Some of it was sort of inside baseball, you know, who in the federal government should have responsibility for overseeing Official Languages Act. But in terms of impact on the public, there were a couple of things, for example, that I will cite, a couple of recommendations that came from both English and French-speaking minority communities. One was that Part 7, those positive measures, should be obligatory rather than discretionary. And another one was that the Official Languages Act's requirement for service to the public and language of work requirements should apply to federally regulated businesses and not just to Crown institutions. While all that was going on, the broader landscape was also changing. In about 2009, the language debate heated up again in Quebec. There was intense concern expressed about the supposed decline of French in Quebec, and it became clear that particularly if the Coalition Avenir Québec was elected, that there would be reforms, changes to the Charter of the French Language, Bill 101. In that context, it's important to note that the federal policy lens shifted from focusing on official language minority communities to the demands of Quebec, focusing on, as I say, the supposed decline of French in Quebec. And the process to modernize the Official Languages Act shifted accordingly. I think it's really important to note that all the political parties in Parliament have supported the new political lens, the new focus in terms of policy. So in 2020, we got a speech from the throne, which focused on the supposed decline of French in Canada and in Quebec. And in 2021, the federal government published a policy discussion paper, which was entitled Towards a Substantive Equality of Official Languages in Canada. But in fact, what it proposed was an asymmetric, lopsided, if you will, approach to English and French as Canada's official languages. It introduced a concept that had been rejected repeatedly way back to the time of the D&D Commission of territorializing language rights of Canadians. That is, that instead of consistent federal language rights for Canada, for Canadians all across the country, a new regime would be developed to create a patchwork of rights. I think it's important to note here that the QCGN has always supported strong measures to assist, to enhance, to promote the French language and French language minority communities outside of this province. But we have also strongly supported symmetry in law. It's one thing to say that the frequently beleaguered French language minority communities outside of Quebec need more money, because they do in many cases. But in law, we have argued that the same rights should apply across the country. And that changed, that focus changed with the federal policy paper The clearest example I can cite is the proposal to create new language rights only for French with respect to communications with federally regulated businesses, banks, communications, transportation, so on in Quebec. Indeed, as I'm sure Eva will say, there is now to be a whole new law, a whole new act devoted to the promotion of the French language in federally regulated businesses in Quebec. There's no reference to anglophones. Have I trampled on your
It's fine. So what is it's C-13 and what are our concerns? Well, the new policy under C-13 would be a sea change, as we mentioned, as it's been mentioned several times now, in federal official languages policy that we believe will adversely impact the English-speaking community of Quebec. One, C-13 recognizes for the first time French as a minority language in Canada, which is likely to create a confusion with the concept of an official language minority community. Because in the original Official Languages Act, as it was proposed, it was always very clear, and I think it was to the benefit of the French language across Canada, that it was meant to be equal to the English language in Canada at a national level. Now it will be recognized as a minority language, so it creates a new concept and puts into question, well, what does that mean for us here in Quebec? It also proposes to specifically and exclusively recognize the Quebec Charter of French Language within the Official Languages Act. Now, I want to point out, this is the new Charter of the French language, which is the way it has been rewritten with Bill 96. We are no longer talking about Bill 101. And we all know the difficulties that we have with this new and revised Charter of the French language. And it's specifically mentioned, while no other provincial language regimes are mentioned, and there are language regimes in New Brunswick, in the Atlantic provinces, New Brunswick and other, Ontario and so on in other provinces. It does not, this new C-13 does not fix the issues that we've had with Part 7 and the problems that both the Francophone and Anglophone communities, minority language communities, have with Part 7. It creates a regime for language rights with respect, as Joan has mentioned, to federally regulated businesses in one official language only and on a territorial basis. So that raises the question, what happens when you go to a passport office and you want to get served in English? What does that mean? When you want to go get your employment insurance benefits and you are used to getting your services in English, well, what does this mean? And what does it mean for someone working in the public service? Well, we're talking about that, but the federally regulated businesses, you're used to going to your bank and you're used to getting your services, you're used to going to your to Via Rail and getting your services in English. What is it? What does that all mean? And this is the area that we are very concerned about in terms of everyday services for English-speaking community from the federal government and for employees who work in these various organizations. They will no longer, does it mean they will no longer have any rights in terms of services, human services such as your pay and benefits and all those other things? What does this all mean for employees? Will they be allowed to speak in English with clientele? So these are all the questions that are now up in the air and which are of great concern to us. Next slide. So what do we want? What are we asking for? Well, we are asking for the withdrawal of the bill as it now stands and return to the 2018 consensus. We want, and if that is not the case, if that is not going to happen, we at least want clarifying language that specifically differentiates official language minority communities from Canada's two linguistic communities, and interpretive language to specify that nothing in the Official Languages Act diminishes the rights of our community to receive support from federal institutions, because it is no longer clear. We absolutely want to read all references to the Charter of the French language removed, because we know what that implies for us here in Quebec. And by including it, it means that the Canadian government supports the Charter of the French language as it now stands with the changes under Bill 96. So we at QCGN have advanced a number of recommendations, both related to Part 7, including the Act, that the Act should not receive this narrow application for English-speaking Quebecers as compared to the Francophone minority communities. We want equal treatment. We want equality in the law. And we all along, we've pointed this out for these many years. It does not mean the same application for the English-speaking minority community and the Francophone minority community, because we are different. We do have needs. And we think that in the past, substantive equality has existed. In other words, in application of the Act, this has been taken into consideration, and it was not one size fits all. And the minority language community outside Quebec, the Francophone community, has received support according to their needs, as we expect support for our needs. And we want, this is what we mean by equality as opposed to asymmetry, which is now being proposed. And what we want, all language rights in federally regulated businesses should apply to both English speakers and French speakers. In other words, apply the concept of equality of English and French within federally regulated businesses as well. And now the question becomes, what can we or I do in this present situation? We have a few things to propose to you. We suggest that you reach out to your member of parliament and express to them your concerns. C-13 is still before the House Standing Committee on Official Languages and is being studied, as well as the Standing Committee on Official Languages for pre-study. Groups and individuals such as yourself can submit a brief on C-13 to either committee. The QCGN can help you do this. Just get in touch with us and we will show you what we've done, and you can certainly use it in your own briefs. And finally, community groups and institutions may also wish to pass resolutions in support of QCGN's position, and I submit the English-speaking community's position and recommendations regarding C-13 as contained in our brief. We can certainly help you with that as well. We are also encouraging individuals to send the letters that we have prepared of support for our position to the members of parliament and to the media and so on, so that it is known what this means, and we can start focusing more on C-13 perhaps in much the same way that we did with Bill 96, and hopefully we will be successful. I will now ask Stephen to moderate any questions
Hi, everyone. Just before we take questions, you're going to get all going to get a copy of this PowerPoint. This is the resources page. So all of the things you see on this slide right now, those are hyperlinked to specific documents and places on our language rights webpage, which is just a vast sea of information there as well. If anybody would like any advice or any help, my email is on the bottom there. You can certainly reach out to me if you want. And now we're in a position to take any questions that anybody might have.
If we're waiting for questions, can I point in here?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to expand a little bit on the proposed use of French in federally regulated private businesses in Quebec and in regions with a strong francophone presence. It does talk about promoting French in federally regulated businesses in other regions than Quebec, but the specific purpose in the act is, the purpose of this act is to foster and protect the use of French in federally regulated private businesses in Quebec. And there are two points here that I'd really like to note. The first is that the whole focus of the act, as that purpose section suggests, is to promote and protect francophones and their language. And heaven knows, we're all in favor of ensuring that francophones and the French language have all the protection and legal and other status that they need. However, there is nothing or virtually nothing in this proposed act that would protect Anglophones. There is one little sort of grandfather clause of you can't be penalized on your job if you are already employed and you don't speak enough French to qualify under the new regime. And it says that nothing in this act would prevent businesses from serving the public in English or giving their employees documentation in English if the business can do so and is inclined to do so. But that's not what you would call major support or protection for the English-speaking community of Quebec. That's the first point. And the second point is that the federal regime, which is proposed in this bill, would be set aside if a federally regulated company in Quebec decided that it would prefer to be governed by the provincial regime under Bill 96, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, is significantly more stringent than even what's proposed here under the federal regime. And what's most astonishing to me is that, as we know, Bill 96 exempts the whole of Quebec's Charter of the French language from the whole of the Quebec Charter of Rights. And it also applies the notwithstanding clause to all the possible clauses in the constitutional Charter of Rights. I'm not aware of any other example where the government of Canada, where the Parliament of Canada has been willing to turn over to a province jurisdiction that was not subject to constitutional Charter of Rights. I find that quite amazing. And Brent.
And I would like to just also clarify a piece where I would mention possibility of, using services and for your passports and employment. That's still a federal service. It's not a federal regulated. However, the provincial government has asked to include all federal services. So you can see that's on the table for down the line. So yeah, when you start fiddling with rights, we just don't know where it ends up. Now I turn it over to Steve.
So our first question comes from Carol Mindell, and I think part of Carol's question was answered. I'll just pose it. If the federal government keeps a reference to the Charter of the French language as it is now, and that implies acceptance of the new charter, does that mean that they have read Bill 96 and have no concerns with it? including the warrantless search and seizure of communication records and documents, any sense of their true feelings on Bill 96, or are they turning a blind eye?
And dare I say, I mentioned the theory that they're turning a blind eye. I suspect that there was not a full understanding in Ottawa of the full implications of Bill 96 when this bill, C-13, was being drafted, because the original version of C-13, C-32, I think it was in the previous session, that came along before Bill 96. It was being drafted before Bill 96, as I recall, and certainly before the passage of Bill 96. And somehow, you know, the inertia of things getting settled and then nobody being willing to go back and reopen the question, this amazing situation that we now face. Hi, Carol.
And just to fill that in a little bit, the QCGN and its legal advisors did brief Minister Lametti on Bill 96 in between the 32-13 happening. So the federal Minister of Justice certainly was aware of 96 from our perspective.
I also think that part of it is really sort of what we see in Quebec as well. It's political. There's a lot of pressure on the minister herself, the minister responsible for the Official Languages Act, to pass legislation, and a lot of the pressure also is coming from the Quebec government in terms of what this means for the Federation.
The next question is from Aki from Yes Employment, or Yes Montreal, or Yes Employment Entrepreneurship to everyone. Do we know where the members of the parliamentary committee stand on this? And I'm assuming that Aki is talking about the House committee, but I suppose we can talk about the Senate committee a little bit too.
Well, I know Joan knows this better than I, but I can certainly say that we made presentations to both the House committee and the Senate committee, and the reception was very different. We got a much more receptive hearing from the Senate committee as opposed to the House committee. The House committee is the members of Parliament, the Senate committee are the senators. So certainly senators who I feel have a much deeper knowledge of the issues and of the minority language communities and of our own community. And we're certainly much more receptive to our concerns.
I think it's fair to say that historically, the membership of both the Commons Committee and the Senate Committee has consisted largely of francophones, and in particular of francophones of Quebec, although we're not supposed to say that anymore, but francophones from other provinces. And they naturally see things through their own lens. English Quebecers have not historically played what I would consider to be the appropriate role in these committees. I actually once heard a parliamentarian refer to the Official Languages Committee as le Comité des Francophones. And that has been, to some extent, the unstated attitude. So when they're looking at official languages legislation, their natural instinctive reaction based on their own experience is to view it through the lens of francophone needs, and the English-speaking communities' needs are.
I think it's worth saying too that there are two members of parliament in particular who have been very helpful. Patricia Latanzio, who sits on the House committee, has been very helpful to us, asked us questions, and sort of is bringing the file along. And the other person who's been tremendously helpful, but although he does not sit on that committee, has been Anthony Housefather with the caucus. So Anthony and Patricia have been doing a really good job trying to get our position known within caucus and within the House and within Parliament. But understand, like Senator Fraser said, this really is a business associated with francophones, and our voice is it's difficult to hear our voice.
It's not feel bad.
Are there any other questions?
How about some comments?
I can't see anybody.
So may I make a comment, colleagues?
Go ahead, Sylvia.
So the timeline for the presentations to this committee is from now until the end of October. And I just want to reinforce or restate how important it is for the government of Canada to hear what we have to say, articulate our concerns. Actually, if I may share with you a meeting with Canadian Heritage Deputy Minister that Eva and I had a couple of weeks ago. She seemed even a little surprised at our very strong criticism of the Charter of French Language being in this document, mention of the Charter of French Language being in this document. And so while Eva and I made our points at that meeting, I did follow up with an email to her. It's quite amazing how people don't seem to understand. We have to repeat how bad this law is for the English-speaking community. Maybe Eva, you want to reinforce that point?
Yeah, it's a general mindset, I find.
We can't hear you,
Yeah.
Eva.
Oh. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's a general mindset, I find, with federal officials. First of all, even here, it's difficult for everybody to understand our concerns with Bill 96, although we've spent so much time and so much energy in trying to explain it and really, raise the warning bells about it. And it's a difficult one, and it's not only the deputy minister. I find whenever we speak to any federal official, whether it be a politician who hasn't been immersed in this, they really do not understand, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to communicate outside Quebec now, the way we did with the Hill Times, to address the issue out there so that people are aware of our concerns regarding C-13. And it's a tough one to get out there and to change minds. I see also a question. Stephen, are you answering Lorraine's question? Okay. My sense, Lorraine, Lorraine is asking whether the Charter of the French Language is both Bill 101 and Bill 96, or only Bill 101, since C-13 was tabled before Bill 96 had been adopted. Well, there's no reference in C-13 as to the date of which, once it's the French language, the Charte de la langue française, it's what it is today at the time when C-13 will be passed.
So we have a question. We have Maureen, you have your hand up. And then we have another question from Carol.
Go ahead, Maureen.
Hi, and I just want to talk from the perspective of the common man, i.e. me. The thing is, all of this, I think, for our community organizations, I'm thinking of the senior center that I represent, that these, and I read the paper every day. The material you're presenting today, I'm really not getting that clearly through the general press. And so I think there's a lot of our organizations that really don't realize what's going on here. okay, in very succinct, it's very complicated. And remember, we've been under COVID restrictions for so long that, I mean, a lot of us have hibernated. I just wonder if there's a way that maybe you can prepare, and I guess it would be Stephen, something that we, like, I would be prepared to present something to our board so that we write a letter to the government if that's what you want, okay? Or whatever it is you want from us. But what we need is more, not more accurate information, because I'm not trying to imply people are being inaccurate here. It's more that we need that I can't reproduce what you've just said to me, okay? So even though I know it's pretty serious and I'm not happy with what I've heard. So I just wonder if there's a way that you can rally the community organizations that are associated with you that, look, here are the talking points. And, you know, even if, is it bad for us to write one common letter that everybody sends out from different organizations that wish to do so? Then they pass it through their board, and you've got something to be able to hand to a board and say to them, look, this is what we're concerned about. I think what I suspect is sometimes in the QCGN, there are so many knowledgeable people, but the organizations you've got working with you, they're doing other things. And so basically they're very supportive, but at the same time, they don't know where to go. And they need to be guided a little bit in the sense that they just don't have the time to write this stuff up and investigate it properly, so that that when the letter hits the officials, they understand what people are saying and say, hey, wait a minute, this group is really not too happy with this. Those that are really involved know. You know, like you and Joan and Eva and Stephen, all you guys know this stuff. But the rest of us is a little harder to get around unless you've had some specific examples in your community or whatever with your organization. So I don't know whether there's something we could do to perhaps mobilize a little easier. That's my suggestion.
Right, Maureen, that's the challenge. And
yeah,
I mean, that's one of the reasons we organize this webinar today, is to help you deal with that. And I know that we have material that would be very happy to share with you. And that is the point, to get you on board and with the organizations that you are with. Yeah. And I would suggest you also share things like we sent you the article in the Hill Times, which really lays out in simple terms, easily understood terms, what the issues are without going too technical. And I understand that, you know, sometimes these can be technical, and you know, some of us are more knowledgeable, obviously, about it. But I think that if we share, and then I think the Network News also has, just take it and share it with the people, you know, send it to them by email, or if you're not sure how to do it, just ask QCGN to help you with that. You know, they get people excited or upset or whatever the appropriate word is, and to do things about it. And we certainly can help you provide as much material as we can to make it understandable, because I know these things are complex.
We have another question from Carol. Carol, you're going to have to help me out with this. Maybe come off mute. Is there a sense of where the federally regulated private businesses fall in terms of implementing the new charter of the French language, or C-13? So C-13 hasn't passed yet. So I think the question is, where are the federally regulated businesses in terms of implementing the amended charter of the French language, charter of the French language as amended by Bill 96?
Well, what I mean is what I don't remember if it was Joan who was saying it or Eva, that the federally regulated private businesses will have a choice of either implementing what the new charter of language is stipulating, or what C-13 will be recommending. And I was just wondering, is there a sense of, like, for instance, Via Rail or the Bank of Montreal or Royal Bank of Canada, if they already have a sense of, no, we're going to go with C-13, or we're going to go with the new charter of the French language?
So I have an answer to that. But the answer is probably not going to not going to be helpful in the sense that this work is being done in back channels. So nobody wants to upset, you know, one or the other of the governments, the feds or the prov, certainly the prov at this time, as they're, you know, in the election and coming out of it. I think we'll probably hear more about this after the election, when the new government, the new provincial government is installed through newspapers. Certainly those federally regulated businesses are not coming to us. So we would hear things through rumor, or we heard there's a letter sent to somebody to say, should we do this? What should we do? So Carol, we haven't had anything given to us, except a couple of times in the newspaper, we saw somebody had talked about having to think about this, but I think we'll hear more about this going forward as the new government in Quebec is proclaimed.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think we should be, I think we should be worried though.
A complicating factor here is that the present government of Quebec has unilaterally announced that it has jurisdiction over all businesses in Quebec, including those that under the Constitution are federally are in the federal jurisdiction. So there is room here for interesting legal fights. But the question, as Sylvia suggested, is whether the businesses that are going to be asked to make a choice here would not just opt for a quiet life and say, oh, we're in Quebec, we'll deal with Quebec. And then down the line, there might be other legal questions arise related to the notwithstanding clause.
And that's a fight for another day for all of us, huh? If and when that happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure who SK Dell is.
Sandra.
Oh, SK Sandra. For me, the most concerning point that should be emphasized to the public is the recognition of Quebec's Charter of the French language and the implications of the notwithstanding clause in constitutional terms.
You're here.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
Okay, it's 12:56. Sylvia.
So if there are no more questions, and if you do have questions that you think of tomorrow or later this evening or whatever, you know, please don't hesitate. I'm going to throw Stephen under the bus on this because he's there and he's doing. We're doing very good work with Stephen and our board around this issue. This issue is paramount. And it will become even more complexified, if that's not a word probably, but it feels good, or with the election, with the new government in Quebec. And there are some dire warnings that we're giving you today. We have to remember over the next 6 to 8 months to fight this piece of legislation. So don't be shy. Send us emails. We will endeavor to give you the answers, but also the references that Stephen has put in the PowerPoint are really quite important. And Stephen, I think, offered to go and meet boards if you have boards that would like to hear more in depth about this, and you feel that you need some help. We'll support you. We'll support all of you. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. You're still on.